Welcome again to Bloomerang Academy. Thank you so much for joining us today, where we are talking about Bloomerang gift entry and reporting foundations. We know that a lot of you already have some gifts in your database that you may have been tracking from a different system, but we wanted to get together and be on the same page so that you can use Bloomerang most effectively. My goal today is to be able to help you understand and enter the basic types of gifts in Bloomerang. We'll learn what those different gift types are and how to enter them in Bloomerang. Also, I'd like to help you understand Bloomerang terminology and setup so that you can enter the gifts the way you need to in your database. We'll also take a look at how to run basic reports on gifts. It looks like from our poll today, there's a lot of interest in reporting, so I'll make sure that we have plenty of time for that. So today, given that goal, this is what we're going to take a look at. We're going to take a look at how to enter all the different types of transactions in Bloomerang. As we're doing that, we're going to go through the Bloomerang terminologies. What are the required fields when you're entering gifts in Bloomerang? What are the default fields that are there for everyone? And what are some custom fields, or how do you use custom fields to track additional information about your gifts? We'll also take a look at some things on how to make data entry easier for you. We'll walk through our rapid gift entry feature, which is available to everyone. And this is a great use case for maybe you receive a stack of checks, maybe 10 checks that you'd like to enter manually. What's an easy way to do that versus an import wherein you're importing a large number of historical donations, or perhaps you had a large event where you would like to import donations. We won't take a look at that in detail, but we'll take a look at what's the best way to use when. We also have a Google Sheets batch entry feature. Again, we won't go into detail into this, but we'll look at what are the differences of this so you can decide what you can do or what is best for you to use for your organization. And of course, we are going to take a look at some transaction reports, building some common transaction reports that we see our customers asking for. So first, let's talk about transaction types in Bloomerang. When we talk about transaction types, these are the different types of transactions that you can enter into Bloomerang and that you can also report on. First, we have donations. So these are your one-time gifts. These can be by cash, by check, credit card, EFT, even in kind falls under those donations. And we also have pledges and pledge payments. What's the difference between a pledge and a pledge payment? So for Bloomerang, pledge is the promise to pay. So if someone says, I'm committing $1,000 to your organization, that is a pledge. You know that this donor is committing to $1,000. As I'm paying into that, maybe I give you a one-time check for $1,000. Maybe I pay in installments. Those are the pledge payments that are coming in. We also have recurring donation schedules and recurring donation payments. Recurring donation schedule is the entry that tells you how much, well, first of all, a recurring donation comes on a recurring basis, so it's not just a one-time gift. So it's if someone is giving $5 a month, for example. So they're giving on a monthly basis and they're giving $5 a month. The schedule is the entry that tells you how much is being given at what frequency. Now, as the payments start coming in, as those $5 are coming in every month, those are called the payments. The pledge payment, the recurring donation schedule, and the recurring donation payment each have their own entry in your timeline, and you can report on these items separately. And we'll take a look later how to report on it to get exactly what you need, so because you don't want to be confused. And you'll see a one-to-many relationship here. So you can have one pledge that can have one or more payments associated to it. You can have one schedule that has one or more payments associated with it as well. And then we also have soft credits. We get this question a lot. What is a soft credit and how do we use it? A soft credit is a way to give a constituent credit for raising dollars for your organization without those dollars necessarily coming from their own pocket. For example, let's say I was a volunteer solicitor for your organization and I talked to a donor, and through my cultivation of that donor, the donor gave a donation. You would credit the donor for the donation that they gave, but you would give me as soft credit as a way to acknowledge my efforts to bring those donations in. Other ways we've used soft credits, or other great uses for soft credits, are also matching gifts. For example, I make a donation to your organization and Bloomerang matches the donation. So let's say I make a $100 donation. You would enter that under my account, and then Bloomerang matches and gives you $100 as well. You would enter the $100 on Bloomerang's account and soft credit me, because Bloomerang would not have given that $100 if they weren't matching that gift. So it's good to acknowledge that. Other ways we've seen soft credits used are also for peer-to-peer transactions. If you do peer-to-peer fundraising, you would credit the actual donor and soft credit the fundraiser, the peer-to-peer fundraiser. We also see this for donor-advised funds or United Way. In general, you want to enter the donation on the entity or the individual that's writing the check to your organization. But if there's individuals behind those, then you would soft credit those individuals. So in a nutshell, that's what our soft credit is. And we'll take a look at how each of these transaction types are entered. So let's go ahead and jump in. I'm going to be jumping in between the slides and my database today. If you need me to go a little bit slower, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. So when you're doing basic entry, of course, you have to be on the constituents account. And this big blue button up here is going to be your friend. When you click on this, this shows you the different types of entries that you can have on a constituents timeline. Today, we're going to focus on the transactions themselves. So when we click on this, I know we also see interaction, task, note, and relationship. We have different classes for those, so we won't talk about those today. Today, we're going to focus on the transactions. So we said our transaction types are donations, pledges and pledge payments, recurring donations and schedules and payments, and soft credits. How come we don't see pledge payments here, or recurring donation payments, or soft credits? Well, that's because you'll need to have a pledge on the timeline already before you can enter a pledge payment. So to enter a pledge payment, you need to have the pledge in there first, and then you can add payments from the pledge. In order to enter a recurring donation payment, you'll need to have the schedule in there first and then you can add payments to it. Soft credits are always tied to another transaction. It's not a standalone transaction, so you can't add a soft credit by itself. So we'll start by taking a look at donations. Let me just reset here for a bit. So when you're entering donations in Bloomerang, first I wanted to point out, whenever you see fields that are in green, those are required fields. That means you need to fill out those fields before you can save these transactions. And I also wanted to point out what are our default fields, meaning these are available for everyone, versus what are custom fields. So if you look at our new donation here, everything that's within this box, these are default fields. This is available to everyone. Now, if there's information beyond what is included here that you would like to track about the donation, you would likely need to create custom fields for those fields. We'll take a look later how to create those custom fields. So first, for the default fields, it's going to ask you to enter a date. So let's say we're going to enter today's date, and then it's going to ask you for an amount. Let's say Peter Porker is giving us $50 today, and we do have a field where you can indicate if there's a non-deductible portion of the gift. So for example, if from Peter's $50 gift, maybe he gets a t-shirt in return that's worth $10, we could add that non-deductible item in there. All of these fields that we're entering into, you can use as merge fields in letters, and you can also report on. For now, we'll take that non-deductible out. It's going to also to ask you for the fund, campaign, and appeal. Now, I wanted to make sure we all have a common definition of how we're using these in Bloomerang, so we'll recap what a fund, campaign, and appeal mean. In Bloomerang, the fund is where the gift is allocated. So if Peter says this $50 should go to your program fund, then that's where it's being allocated. Or if Peter Parker says, use this for whatever you need, you can identify better where it's needed the most. Maybe that goes to the unrestricted fund. So the fund is where are these donations being allocated. So for today, we'll choose the unrestricted fund. Campaign refers to if you have large-scale efforts to raise funds. Let's say you're trying to build a building, so you have a building fund, or you have a capital campaign going on, or maybe it's your general operating. You can select that as the campaign. So let's say for this one, it's going toward our annual campaign. And then the appeal kind of asks the question of how or why did this constituent give? Maybe they gave because they received our spring appeal or our fall appeal. Maybe they gave because someone personally solicited them. Or perhaps they gave because a friend of theirs was running a peer-to-peer fundraising campaign for your organization. That would be the appeal. So let's say for this one, somebody personally solicited Peter Parker, and that's why he gave. So you can see here, you can fill out all of these fields, your fund, campaign, and appeal, and it just helps you in your reporting figure out where the money is going and where it's coming from, and it helps you with that. The next thing that we come to is the method. So earlier I talked about these are one-time gifts. They can come in via cash, check, in kind. Whenever you select a different option, you're going to have additional options. So right now for check, I just have a note, which is available for everything. But let's say I change the method to check. The view expands, and I have additional fields that I can put in. I can have a check number. I can also have a check date. So typically the date here that we see on top is when we received the donation, but there could be a different check date that's written on the check that we received. So you can fill in this information and be able to report on this as well. You can also give via credit card or EFT. In this example, I'm using Bloomerang Payments. So you can use credit card or EFT if you have a payment processor connected to your Bloomerang account. So if in this case I have Bloomerang Payments, that enables me to process credit cards and EFT directly in my database. And as a bonus, it also allows me to create online giving tools so I can accept online donations. We also have in-kind. So we don't separate monetary donations from in-kind donations in the system. They're both entered as donations, but the method would be different. So if it's an in-kind donation, you can select a method of in-kind. It's going to ask you for a type. That would be goods or services. And you have the option to enter in your fair market value and an additional description of what those in-kind gifts were. As I mentioned earlier, you're always going to have a note field. So if there's any additional information about this particular gift that you would like to record, you can add that into the transaction as well. We have the soft credits here. So for example, here we said that Peter Parker gave because this was coming from a personal solicitation. If I want to soft credit the person who solicited Peter to give this gift, I would do that through the soft credits. We'll come back to this in just a moment. if this was also a tribute gift, let's say Peter Parker gave $50 in memory of his Uncle Ben, we can add Uncle Ben as a tribute. So I'm going to click the plus button. I'm going to search for Uncle Ben and add that. So the tribute would have to already be created in Bloomerang first before you can add them as a tribute in the donation on the transaction itself. You also have an acknowledgement field here. This is very important because of course we want to thank Peter for his gift. By default, everything that you enter is going to be entered with an acknowledge field of no, which means we haven't thanked him for this gift yet. But we also have fields here where you can say yes. Maybe, he handed us the check and we gave a personal thank you right away. You can say yes, or maybe typically this is used for recurring gifts. Do not acknowledge. If Peter says, oh, please, you don't need to send me a letter every month if it's a recurring gift, just send me one at the end of the year. This gift doesn't need to get a separate acknowledgement. You can use that. But typically you're going to start out with a no, and you can also filter by this. So when you run your thank you letters, you can tell your thank you letter, this gift should generate for everyone who has a gift that has not been acknowledged yet, and this will pick that up. We also have here a feature where you can assign a letter. So once you've built your thank you letters in Bloomerang, you can select any transaction letter with a purpose of acknowledgement. So you can see here when I click the drop down, I have several thank you letters that I can choose from. And let's say this is the letter that I want to send him. I can click that letter and I can click on this checkbox here. When I click save, it's going to take me directly to the letter so I can start preparing that letter for Peter. We're going to skip this for now because I want to go back to the soft credits. So this is the acknowledgement for the gift from Peter. When I try to enter a soft credit, let's say Peter gave because his friend Tony Stark told him about our organization and told him that this is a great organization to support. So we're going to select Tony Stark. So I can add a soft credit up to the amount of the donation, and the soft credit itself also has a separate acknowledgement field. So the acknowledgement field here is for Peter Parker. The acknowledgement field here is for Tony Stark. So maybe we want to send a separate letter to Tony Stark to tell him, thank you so much for supporting our organization, for helping raise these funds. We can include a separate or prepare a separate acknowledgement for Tony Stark. So we're going to go ahead and click add. And I wanted to say, by the way, notice that when we tried to add a soft credit, we were searching through the different constituents in the database. So the soft credited person also needs to exist in your database already before you can add them as a soft credit on someone else's transaction. So I'm going to go back here, select my thank you. We'll generate the letter after we click save. Also, if you have any attachments, let's say you want to take a picture or you scanned the check, if this was by check, you can add that as an attachment in Bloomerang. You can add it as a file if you have a file, or if you want to add a link as an attachment, you can do that as well. We're not going to do that today, but we'll go ahead and click save. So once we save this transaction, a couple of things are going to happen. First, since we click that checkbox to say generate the letter upon saving, it's going to take us to this letter. So this is the letter that's going to be generated for Peter for making that gift. Notice that it's populated some merge fields already. It's populating the amount of his gift as well as the date of his gift, because that's what I set up in the letter. But notice as well, I guess we didn't have an address for Peter. So this is something good see so we can change it. So perhaps I can go back to Peter's profile, add his address so that when we generate the letter, we have his address. Or maybe I'm going to hand deliver this letter to Peter or send it as an attachment and I don't need the address. I can edit the letter and add something in there, or just take it out if I don't need it, and I can save. From here, I can download the letter and print as usual from my computer. I'm going to skip that for now and go to the timeline, because now that we've created that gift for Peter, the gift shows on his timeline. So when you see the gift on the timeline, anything that has a gift icon like this, those are different types of transactions. It's also going to show you the fund campaign and appeal. And if we go back to Peter's summary, because he made that gift, his engagement level, you'll notice, has increased from cold to cool. As you're entering information on your constituents' accounts, not just gifts, but also interactions, those factor into their engagement level. And the more engaged they are with your organization, the higher their engagement level is going to be. And that's our donations. Because we chose to generate the letter right after saving, it's also automatically adding that interaction on Peter Parker's account to signify that he's going to get that letter. I'm going to go back into this donation and we'll take a look at the soft credit. So as I mentioned earlier, there is no way to go to a constituent's account and add a soft credit directly from there. The soft credit has to be tied to another transaction. But here, if we click on the soft credit, that takes us to Tony Stark's account and takes a look and shows us the soft credit. It's going to inherit the fund campaign appeal and other details of the original donation, so you aren't able to change that. And there's also a link to the original donation. If we go to Tony Stark's timeline as well, of course, we can see the soft credit in there too. And you can report on all of these transactions. I can run a report just to see the donations. I can run a report just to see the soft credits. I can run a report to see both. Just depends on what you need. We have a couple questions here. Are the acknowledgement letters saved in Bloomerang? Yes. So if we go back to Peter Parker's account, you have the interaction for the acknowledgement, and when you click on the interaction, that's always going to have a link to the letter itself. So if for whatever reason you needed to reprint that letter, you always have it stored in Bloomerang. You can always go back to the interaction, check out the letter again, make any changes if you need to before sending it and before printing it and sending it, or if you just need to re-download it and resend it, you have access to that as well. Wonderful. Let's go back to our other transaction types here. So we've taken a look at new donation. We also have new pledge and new recurring donation. Before we take a look at entering that, I wanted to talk about what's the difference between a pledge and a recurring donation. So when you're dealing with pledges in Bloomerang, typically the amount that you have is the total amount. I am committing $1,000 to your organization. You know that the amount that I'm committing to is $1,000 that may be paid one time or that may be paid in installment, but you're going to get $1,000. And once you receive the $1,000, my commitment is fulfilled. For recurring donations, what's the big thing that you're tracking is the recurring amount. If I'm giving $10 a month, the schedule will have the $10 a month, right? Maybe when I tell you to stop, or maybe when I stop my recurring donation, I got to $500, maybe I got to $1,000, maybe I got to $2,000. That doesn't matter as much as knowing that I'm giving $10 a month until it stops. In terms of pledges, in terms of time frame, typically for pledges, you have a set time frame. You know when the commitment is going to be fulfilled. I'm committing $1,000. I'm going to pay that off by the end of the year. I'm committing $5,000 or pledging $5,000 spread out over the next 5 years. So you have a specific time frame that you're taking a look at. Whereas the recurring donation, you have the frequency, and it could go on indefinitely until the donor tells you to stop. So the frequency in my earlier example would be monthly. So this is something I'm giving monthly. It doesn't matter if it's monthly for a year or 2 years or 3 years. Right now we know that it's monthly until the donor decides to stop. Now for the pledge, again, the commitment is fulfilled when the payments equal the pledge amount, but for recurring donations, it's typically open-ended. So I'm giving $10 a month again until I am able to. So for pledges, typically what we see here is that the payment methods may vary, and that could also be tied to like the time frame or installments that they're looking at. Maybe a donor will come to you and say, I'm pledging $1,000, and at the end of the year, they just write you a check for $1,000. But maybe a donor says, I'm pledging $1,000. I'm going to pay on it quarterly. Here's my credit card, so you can just charge my card every quarter, instead of me sending a check every quarter. For recurring donations, because it happens so frequently, we typically see this auto-processed. And again, this is the advantage of if you're using a processor that's connected to Bloomerang. For example, Bloomerang payments, you can set the payments to automatically charge on schedule, so you don't have to keep reminding yourself or reminding the donors to send in those payments. So let's take a look at how to enter pledges and recurring gifts. So from here, if we're going to enter a pledge, we just select New Pledge, and a lot of it looks like our donation page already. So let's say in our example, let's say Peter is pledging $1,000 to the Unrestricted Fund to our annual campaign because maybe he received a crisis email that we sent last year. Now here you can select an auto payment method. If Peter says, oh, I'm just going to send you a check, you're going to select an auto payment method of none. If Peter says, sure, it's $1,000 and I'm going to pay by credit card, you can select that. Or EFT, you can select that as well. For now, we'll select none, and then we'll go to the schedule. So the schedule is where you tell the system, how is Peter going to pay on this pledge? So first it's going to ask you, when is the first installment date? So let's say it's going to be the end of the year. He's going to send us a check sometime at the end of the year. It's going to ask for the frequency as well. So this is where it comes in. Is this going to be a one-time payment, or is he going to be paying on this pledge in installments? So if he's going to be paying in installments, you have these different options. You can also, if it's a one-time payment, you can select yearly and have the installment amount be equal to the pledge amount, or you can select custom. If you select custom, it's going to ask you how much the installment amount is going to be and how many installments are going to happen. So if it's just an installment of one, he's going to send you a check once at the end of the year. You can select that. You can click Generate Installments, and it gives you an idea of what that payment schedule looks like. So this tells you that you're going to receive a one-time payment of $1,000 at the end of the year, and then you can save. So once you've saved the pledge, if you take a look at the pledge, you have an option here to add a payment to the pledge. So that's how you add a new pledge payment. Or if you go back to the button up here and select New Donation, it's going to ask you You can choose to add a new donation, or if there's any open pledges that are available on Peter's timeline, it will also show you that. So whenever you're adding payments, you can always go to new donation, and if there's any open pledges, you'll be able to select that pledge so you can add a payment to that pledge. So we'll select this pledge and we'll click Create Pledge Payment. Let's pretend maybe it's already the end of the year. Maybe Peter would like to pay early. Let's just pick a future date for now and pretend we time travel to that date in the future. And Peter has made a pledge. He has sent us his check. Because I selected check, I can enter those additional details about the check if I would like. Click Save to enter the payment, and then we're going to have the pledge payment on his timeline. And that's it. Now, I would follow the same process if Peter chose to pay 2 installments of $500. I would enter the $500 first now, enter the $500 later, but every time we receive a payment that's toward a pledge, that's how we would enter it. We have a question here. If a pledge was fulfilled but not entered correctly, how can you remove the remaining pledge payments and mark it fulfilled? So let's take a look. So any of these timeline entries or any of these gifts that I'm showing you today, because we're creating them manually, you can always go back and edit them. This, for example, even this $50 donation, oh, I made a mistake in typing it. It wasn't 50, it was 80. Their handwriting was a little bit odd and I didn't see it right. I can always change that and save it, and that will get reflected. I'm not going to do that right now. I can always go back to the pledge as well. And if I needed to, I can change the pledge amount. If I need, I can change the pledge payment amount that I need. So in this case, it's already fulfilled, right? We already put the $1,000. He's already made the payment, but I can still make changes to it if I need to. That's not locked or anything. Now, if you do receive online donations, for example, where somebody made a $10 gift online, that's not something you can easily change like this because that's the amount that was charged. But because we're just entering these in manually, you can always make those changes and make them correct. So if you see here, oh, we were mistaken, it was a $1,500 pledge instead of $1,000. You'll notice that the balance automatically adjusts to reflect that difference. So I can click Save, but before I save, it's reminding me, hey, the schedule that I put was only for 1,000, so I need to make adjustments for how those additional payments are going to come in. So I can edit the schedule and add, let's say, again, I'm just picking a different date here. Let's do, just to make sure that we're accounting that, okay, we need to receive an additional 500 because he increased his pledge by that amount. And then I can click Save. So now it's going to show the updated amount. It did not affect the payment that was already there. If we needed to make any changes to that as well, we could. Thank you for that question. Now, how do we add recurring donations? Peter's being very generous with us today, so he would like to make a recurring donation as well. So let's say we're going to start a recurring donation. Again, it's going to ask for the amount, the fund. Let's say this time this is going to the orangutan rescue. He's really a fan of Blossom and he'd like to support the orangutans. And let's say he's giving because he received our fall appeal, and he's going to pay by credit card. And again, this is a great advantage if you have a processor connected with Bloomerang. You can set these payments to auto process so you don't have to remember to do it manually every time. So let's say he's going to make a recurring donation. He gave us his card details. It's going to also, or I also need to set the start date as well as the frequency. If the start date is the same as today, the payment will automatically process today, and then it's going to automatically process every time that date comes around. So, but if I don't want the payment to process right away, I can select a future date. So let's say we're just going to select the 1st of next month because we want it to process on the 1st of every month. We would just select that future date. Select our frequency as well. You can click on the drop down here to see what the different frequencies are available to you. So for today, we're just going to choose monthly. End date is typically not something that gets filled out when the recurring donation is first set up. The end date is something that you would use later on. Let's say the donor contacts you and lets you know that they would like to stop this particular recurring donation. You can put an end date here and the donations will stop processing when it gets to that date. So typically when you're first setting up the recurring donation, this is not something that you need to fill out. But if you need to end, if you need to finish, if you need to stop the payments later on, you just put the end date in here and the payments will stop once that date rolls around. So for today, we're going to leave that blank and we're going to click Save. Once we click Save, we're going to see the recurring donation schedule on his timeline. And again, how do we add payments to this? Let's say we jump to the future again and we've already received a payment. It's not the future yet, so the automatic payment is not something we'll see. But if we click on the recurring schedule and we click on Actions, we can add a new payment from here. Or like we saw earlier with the pledge payments, if we click the blue drop-down arrow here, and if we click New Donation, it's going to show us any open pledges and any open or active recurring donation schedules. So maybe I just want to add a straight up one-time donation. I can just click that. Maybe I want to add a payment to a recurring donation. I can click that. Now, when you do this, it's going to ask you, how should this payment be applied? Because this schedule, or this payment, this recurring donation has a schedule that it follows. So if we're adding a payment today, should it be applied to the upcoming schedule, or is this an extra payment that Peter is making? So if you want to apply it to the scheduled payment, he's just making a payment a little bit in advance. Or if he's adding an extra payment, meaning we're adding a payment today, but when the schedule comes around, his card is still going to be charged, you can choose that option. So let's say for today, we're going to apply it to scheduled payment. It's not an extra payment. It's going to fill in the information from the schedule. It's going to be the same fund campaign appeal. You can change anything if you need to, but if the details look good, you can click Save. And there is our recurring payment. And this is what I mentioned as well earlier. Whenever you see a pledge payment, it's always going to be associated with a pledge. Whether that is a one-time payment or several installments, it's always going to be associated with a pledge. Whenever you see a recurring donation payment or a recurring payment, it's always associated with a schedule. You can have multiple recurring payments. It's always going to be associated to a schedule. So you could see, just so you're aware that you can see all of those or multiples of those in a constituent's timeline. Wonderful. Now let's quickly take a look at some reports that you can you can run to take a look at these transactions. So we're going to click New. Today, we're going to be building our reports from scratch, but I also wanted to remind everyone that we have several report templates that you can choose from. So all of the reports that we are building today, we're building from scratch, but these reports already have filters and columns pre-populated. These are the filters and columns we think would be helpful for you, and you can use that as a starting point and customize for what you need. So you can see here, if you have a lot of pledges in your system, in your database, you might want to take a look at your pledge details or your pledge reminders. And it has, again, some filters and columns that we think would be helpful, but maybe you want to change the date range that the report is looking at. You can use this as a starting point and make your customizations as needed. For now, we're going to build a report from scratch. If you want to see gift details, if in the report you want to see a list of gifts, typically you're going to want, or we recommend running a transaction report. A good thing to remember is a constituent report will give you a list of people. Now, you may be able to tell the report, give me a list of people who have these transactions, but it's still a list of people. If you want a list of the transactions themselves and see the details of those individual transactions, a transaction report is what you'd like. So we'll select that. Now, by default, if it doesn't have any filters, we don't have any filters here yet, this is just a report from scratch, it's just going to show you everything. This report now shows me all the different transactions I have in my database from when I first started using this database up to what I entered today. It's just going to show me everything. Now you can narrow that down to what you'd like to see. So here you see I have a mix of, earlier we talked about type. So you can see here I have a mix of pledge payment, recurring donation payment, pledge, soft credit, donation. Now what if, let's say, I only want to see certain types of transactions. So let's say I only want to see just the pledges themselves. Well, it's up to you, right? But I just wanted to show when you filter by type, you can choose what you want to see. Maybe you just want to see donations. Maybe you want to see donations and pledge payments. You can select any combinations of these. Or maybe you just want to take a look at soft credits. These are the people who, again, not necessarily giving out of their own pocket, but these are constituents who have raised these dollars on behalf of your organization. Once I filter for type, all the type here will say soft credit. Let's say I just want to take a look at pledge. So all the type here will be pledge. This is the total amount that's been pledged to my organization. Again, throughout all time, right? Because we're not filtering by date right now. We're just filtering by the type. But this will show you pledges. This comes up a lot. I'm going to go here and filter for both pledges and pledge payments. This comes up a lot because when you look at this amount, I don't necessarily have this much, or my organization has not necessarily received this much because it has both the pledge and the pledge payment. Earlier we saw Peter Parker pledged $1,500. He's made $1,000 in payments. This is counting both of that. So the amount column here is going to total everything that's in the report. So you might have some situations where your amounts are off. A good thing to look at is what transaction types are being included in your report. If you only want to total the actual dollars received, then I only want to take a look at my pledge payments. And that's a more realistic and that's a more accurate number for what our organization has actually received. So bear in mind that what you're filtering for, or the type of transactions that you're filtering for, is going to affect what your report is showing you. Another thing our customers typically filter for is date. So let's take a look at filtering by date. So we have two types of date filters, or three types of date filters. During is our dynamic filters. So you can see here it uses fields like last week, this week, next week. Last week is going to depend on when you run the report. This is taking a look at Sunday to Saturday. So if I run this report today, it's going to show me gifts from last Sunday till last Saturday. If I run this report next week, then we're going to see the gifts that we entered today. So that always adjusts based on when you run the report, as opposed to if you click between, you can give the report specific dates and specific date ranges. It will always look at that date range regardless of when you run that report. So that's another thing to take a look at. I also wanted to go back here, and you see here that when I filter or when I search for the field date, there's a couple of different date fields that come up. There's check date, there's created date, there's date. These are the three most common things that get mistaken for each other. So what's the difference between the three? The date, if you recall, when we were entering the gifts on Peter's account, this is the date that we entered on the transaction. So whatever date I type into that field, that's populated into this field. Now, created date is when it was entered into the system. So let's say I saved these gifts today. They're going to show up in the system with a created date of today. So, and then the check date is whatever I enter in that field. So let's say we told the system that they donated by check and we entered a check date for what was written on the check. That's a separate date as well. So be aware of which date you're looking at and which date you're reporting on, because of course you're going to get different results based on the field that you're filtering on. And no one is more correct than the others. It's just, what do you need? Are you looking for the date where it was entered into Bloomerang? That's your created date. Are you looking for the date that was written on the check? That's your check date. Are you taking a look at the date that you entered into the date field? Then that's just your date field. So something to be aware of. So we're just going to go by date and do today, just so we can, we don't have anything for today. Let's do donations today. So we should see Peter Parker's donation in there. Wonderful. So that's something you can take a look at in terms of your transaction reporting. Now, once you have your report created how you would like it, you can always save it. And you can always schedule it as well. So this is great. For example, let's say at the end of the day, I always want to send a report to our accounting team. These are the gifts that came in today. Or maybe instead of date, we want to filter by created date instead. Again, talk to your organization. What do you need? You know what you need. So let's say this one is type as donation, created date is today. I can save that. I can schedule this report to go at the end of the day to our accounting team so they can check reconciliation. I can do that on a weekly basis, a monthly basis. Again, that depends on your organization. So those are kind of the two big things that people ask about. If you are seeing results in your report that shouldn't be there, maybe check your filters for the type, or if the amounts aren't matching, are you filtering for the right type of donations that you want to see, or what date range are you looking at, or what date type are you looking at for your report. Yes, so to recap, let's just do date. So date is what you enter into the date field. Created date, that's automatically when you save it in Bloomerang. So when you click that save button, that date is today. That's the date that it's looking at. The check date again is if it was made by check and you entered a check date in there, that's what it's pulling in. Thank you for the question. Now I wanted to go back and take a look at, this is great, right? We've entered some donations manually and some gifts manually where we're able to report on them, but I'm not typically just entering one gift in a day, and most of the time you're entering gifts in batches. What are some easy ways that you can do that? So if we go back to Peter Parker's account, we have something that we call rapid gift entry. So I'm going to go back to new donation, and let's say I received 10 checks today that I'm going to put into Bloomerang because we recently sent out a direct mail piece to our constituents and we're getting a lot of responses, and I'm entering those checks today. Because the responses are coming from a specific appeal, a specific piece, the checks that I'm entering right now have a lot in common. For example, let's say they're all going to the Unrestricted Fund, they're all going to our annual campaign, they all came from, let's say, our spring appeal. These are all check. Now the check dates, the check number, the amounts might be different, but these are fields that all of the checks I have with me now have in common. What I can do is, instead of entering these details one by one on different constituents, I can click the Actions button and store these as default values. Now, it doesn't look like anything's different right now, but let's say we'll go ahead and finish this. Peter Parker sent $50. We're going to put in the check number. We're going to put in the check date. And then we're going to save this donation. If I go to a different constituent, the next check in my hand or in my pile, we're going to create a new donation. You can see here it says defaults applied, and those fields that we entered earlier on Peter's account were already filled in. It already filled in the fund campaign appeal method for me because I already told the system, this is the same for these batch of checks that I'm entering. Please save these details. So now I can just put in Tony Stark gave 150. This was the check number. This was the check date, and save that, and so on until I get through the pile of checks that I'm going to be entering today. Now, let's say it's already a different day, or I'm entering a gift that's different. Maybe I'm still entering it today, but it didn't come from that appeal. I can always clear the form and it will reset it and make everything blank, and I can enter new details. Now, at this point, I'm just clearing this form for when I'm entering right now. So if I add another donation, it's going to pre-populate those fields again. If I want to completely clear those defaults, I can go back up here and remove the default values. If I remove the default values, I can add new details. Let's say we're fast forwarding to the future, and again, we have a new set of defaults that we want to enter, so we clear the form and resave those details. You can do that anytime. And that just helps with your gift entry, right? So this is, we see this a lot, again, from you're getting a lot of responses from a particular appeal. Maybe you had an event last night and a lot of people gave you some checks. So a lot of things will be common between the different gifts that you're entering. You can use these default fields or save those as defaults, so it can save you a little bit of time on your gift entry. And yes, the defaults stay until you remove them. Great question. So the defaults stay. I've already removed them. If you happen to be entering a check that those defaults don't apply to and that it's just that one check, you can clear the form and it will clear that for that one time. But if you want to completely remove the defaults, go ahead and click Actions and then remove default values. Thank you for the question. A follow-up question here. Can you enter default values for a check number and date when you are entering payroll payments? Yes, you can do that as well. So any fields that you enter before you click the Save Store Defaults, it will save those. Great questions. Thank you for those. Other options that you have for making gift entry quicker are our import tool. Now, we're not going to go into this in detail today. We have a whole separate class on imports, but imports are great when you're entering donations in bulk. Let's say maybe you're new to Bloomerang and you have a spreadsheet of gifts that you want to enter into Bloomerang. You can format that spreadsheet into one of our import templates and you can import those donations in bulk. I will have to caution you that when you're creating an import file for donations, you need to have one line per donation and you need to have enough matching information in your file with the constituents in the database so that we can make sure to add those gifts to the right people in your database if they are already in your database. If you need any help with imports, we will link the resources in the slides that we have for you today. And of course, our support team can help you prepare your import file, look at your import file, and even walk through the import with you. So those options are available for you. We also have a batch entry through Google Sheets that is a paid add-on. So I would say take a look at the different options that we have, see if the rapid gift entry works for you. If you need to be entering more gifts than that, see if the imports will work for you. If you still need more, you might take a look at our Google Sheets batch entry, but we have several options for you to make your gift entry easier and faster. We have a question here. How does Bloomerang determine a match? What if they are in our file as Jonathan Smith and the donor types John Smith? So when doing imports, the system takes a look at first name, last name, plus either email, address, or phone number. So the name itself won't be, if you only have name as matching, that will not recognize it. You need a second piece of information to make sure that that is the correct constituent. Our system does recognize some common nicknames. I believe we have a list for it that we can send out or we can link to our documentation for. So it recognizes some common nicknames, but the best matching that you can use is if you have the constituent's account number in Bloomerang. That is a unique identifier for that constituent. So for Peter Parker here, you see 1535 is his account number. If you have their account number in your import file, the system will recognize them based on their account number, even if the names or even if the names and contact information are not there or are different. In terms of an online donation form, it's the same matching logic. So it's going to look at first name, last name, plus either email, address, or phone. If the first name, last name, plus either email, address, or phone, and first name includes common nicknames that is in the file or what they entered in the online donation matches what's in Bloomerang, Bloomerang will recognize them and add the donation to their account. If it doesn't recognize them, it will create a new account for them in Bloomerang that contains the donation. Now, if the system wasn't able to pick up that they're already in the database and it created what is essentially a duplicate, you can always go to their constituent account and merge them manually, or if they have more matching information, they might show up in your duplicate constituents report. All the tools that we have are pretty smart, but they're still tools, so it's still nice to have those human eyes to check, and you can merge them accordingly if needed. It looks like we have a last question here. Let's say you have 10 donors who pledge to a campaign or because of an appeal. How do you run a report that will pull all those donors and addresses with amounts? Great question. So I would run a transaction report. You can filter by campaign or appeal. So let's say I'm using appeal and everyone who pledged because they received our fall appeal. Right now this is everyone who gave because they received our fall appeal, but this is a different transaction type. So we can click and look for type, pledge, and that will give you everyone who pledged because they received that fall appeal. And if you want to add constituent fields, you would click add column. And first you'll go to constituent, and that will give you access to the different constituent fields like addresses, phone numbers, and things like that. Wonderful. Thank you so much for all of your wonderful questions today. We hope that this has been helpful for you. We have more classes coming up regarding transactions. So we have different classes on Gift Entry Guru. This talks a little bit more about recurring donations and pledges, in-kind gifts, split payments. So if you receive a check where the donor says half of this goes to your unrestricted fund, half of this goes to your orangutan rescue, we have systems in place for that. We also have a class specifically for pledges, which goes through pledge entry, pledge acknowledgement, pledge reminders. We have a whole range of classes for recurring giving that we're calling our recurring giving roadmap. Gift Entry Guru and All About Pledges are coming up live, so you can catch those live coming up, and our complete recurring giving roadmap is on demand right now, so we'll send you the links for those recordings. And of course, if you need extra help, please don't hesitate to ask our support team. Chat and email are free. Please ask as many questions as you need. We love helping our customers, and we love it when you ask questions. So please don't hesitate to reach out. In the meantime, thank you again so much for being with us today, and we hope we see you in another Academy class soon. Have a great day. Bye.